Great question here from Mr. Rossi. Is it time to set the studio up for Atmos? I'm really tempted now that Logic and IK Multimedia have made a kit that makes it less inaccessible. But I think quite a lot of indie producers are interested in Atmos on a budget. Okay, this is a really big topic, and this is why I wanted to do an entire video on this. First of all, let's be absolutely clear what Dolby Atmos is. It is an immersive audio format, and that covers everything from films right up now to music. But it's developed by Dolby, obviously, and Dolby have a very interesting business model. They license their technology. They don't actually create devices to play things back. They don't really get too much involved in any of the retail or commercial actions of that. Their business model is to license stuff out, and it's really interesting that they've now pulled in Apple. So let me just explain a little bit about the origins of Dolby Atmos. What Dolby wanted to do was take the multitude of different surround formats that were being used in the film mixing industry and TV mixing industry and pull them into a single format that could be played back on either a simple 5.1 system, a bigger surround system with many more speakers, or even folded right down into just a 2-track stereo. And that's the beauty of the system. It works by using 2 different types of elements, and you have bed elements. In other words, these are static, these aren't going to move. You can position them, but they're not going to move throughout the course of the piece or the course of the mix. And then these objects, which basically you can move about, and you can also change certain parameters of them. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Spatial audio is not Dolby Atmos. Spatial audio is a piece of technology that takes the information coming from Dolby Atmos playback and recreates, using binaural processing, a fake stereo field in headphones. Now, I think it can be done on speakers a little bit too, but you'd have to have them carefully set up. But its main thrust is headphones, and that's because this is where people are listening to music. So as it kind of all got rolled out, there's been this great scramble to start getting everything remixed into Dolby Atmos. But for us lot, particularly those that are within their own individual setups or looking at this from an artist's perspective, you kind of have to take all of this with a little bit of caution because nobody knows where this is going to land. And let me just outline why you need to be careful with one scenario. Say you do a Dolby Atmos mix in Logic and you bounce the file down from your studio, you're really happy with it, doesn't matter whether you've got the monitors set up or whether you're using headphones, that's beside the point. You've created an Atmos mix inside of Logic and now you want to deliver it. Say this is going to a major record label. Well, it would then go to the person that is responsible for Atmos file handling, and the first question they would ask is, okay, which certified Dolby Atmos studio in the UK, if it's a UK-based mix, has this come from? And then you'd be like, me, from mine? Oh, okay. Are you Dolby certified? And you would probably have to go, no. It would then get rejected. So, basically, the reason I'm pausing here is that I know that there are certain workarounds and exceptions to this, but the kind of situation that's been struck is you have to be fully certified as a studio, whether that be a home studio or a professional commercial enterprise, by Dolby. They have to come in and measure your room and check everything's working correctly and you've got everything set up properly and you know what you're doing, most importantly, before your music can go up as an Atmos file on the streaming services. So that's one bottleneck. The other bottleneck is obviously at the moment, the one company that's providing the hardware is Apple. So the kind of, I suppose, the pinnacle of this playback technology is the AirPods Max, the great big ones. Now they have the best reproduction of the spatial audio stream that's going to come out of the phones, and also it's directly talking hopefully to an Apple phone, so everything's perfect. Now there's obviously going to be all of this grey area start to occur as other companies come into this space. Nobody knows the length of the contracts that Apple have with Dolby. I assume they've got a degree of exclusivity. I reckon Apple have got a degree of exclusivity on this for a bit, but I'm already seeing murmurings that it's coming to other devices as well. So my view is always on something like this, follow the money. And the biggest thing here to understand is, where is Dolby making its money, because they are a licensing company. That's what they do. They license their technology. They don't create the devices that play this stuff back. Now, I've tried to work out why there's this kind of strict layer of control about certified studios, and then I kind of realized, well, actually, people could be doing all of this mixing using the technology, but no money is going to be going back to Dolby apart from maybe the final playback device. This is probably why they want the certification process, but it's also down to making sure that there's a quality control, because there are very, very specific level targets and other kind of bits and pieces that you may not be aware of for the delivery of Atmos files. For example, the Atmos file has to be exactly the same length as the 2-track master. And there is a bit of a hint as to how you should be approaching this. Now, the reason being is that on the streaming services, the Atmos and the 2-track should be utterly interchangeable, and also they should line up perfectly time-wise to make sure that all of, I suppose, the streaming data and all of that kind of stuff is absolutely exact. With all of that in mind, you need to look at any decision about whether to Atmosify your studio very, very carefully. Also, particularly given the cost of living crisis at the moment, you don't want to be making any massive expenditure that you don't need to make. And the first thing I would say is, unless you have a source of income that is starting to demand Atmos mixes, then I would kind of go into this as an investigation before you spend a ton of money and start putting, 6 PMC monitors around the room. The best domestic playback system for spatial audio at the moment are the AirPods Max, or the AirPods Max, sorry, the big Apple headphones that you've probably seen people wearing around. So for me, when it comes to any kind of mixing, you should always be very much aware of where it's going to end up. So if that's the best playback system, that's what you want to get hold of to be testing all of this stuff out with Logic. But bear in mind that if you put a mix together in Logic, in the current scenario, you may not even be able to get it released. Now, the way round that is to then go take your mix that you've done in Logic and take it into an actual fully licensed Atmos room. Then when you come to deliver, whether that be through your distributor, label, or just your own independent service, you will then be able to say, yes, this ticks the box and this is the studio that was done, and then that will keep Apple happier when they're actually receiving the deliverables. Now, there is another piece of bridging software that goes in the middle called the, I believe it's called the Atmos Renderer, and it's made by Dolby. It's authorized on an iLock, and you can just go and buy it. I think I've seen it for $199, but I think it may be $299, I'm not sure. Now, obviously, they very much want you to have this piece of software because it's where they can make a direct sale for the amount that they've put into the technology. And if you're wondering why I'm constantly talking about the figures here, well, I have it on quite good authority from more than one source now that this has to work for Dolby. They have put so much into this that this kind of has to work. Now, I'm in the UK, and I am unsure, actually, whether this is going to be a flash in the pan or whether it's really going to take off. Because I'm semi-underwhelmed by an awful lot of the mixes that I'm hearing. They're nice enough, there's just a bit of room, but one of the problems is you can't push this as far as you can sonically, a 2-track master, and because of that, you don't quite get the intensity of sound. So some of the masters that are being created, or some of the mixes that are being created, are a little softer. Okay, they've got more, they've got nice spatial elements and things like that, but I'm used to this slightly tough modern sound that I kind of really love, I must admit. Now, that will change, and I've just noticed Waves have put out a multi-channel limiter, so the technology is starting to actually catch up with this. But the first thing to do with anything like this is do a load of investigation. Have a listen to some, get yourself any kind of decent spatial audio system. And that does mean 9 times out of 10 at the moment, Apple products, and have a listen to what's out there from Apple Music and see how these mixes are being put together, and listen to them against the 2-track masters as well, so you're aware of what's going on. Next, there are 2 real main options for putting these kind of mixes together. And the first one is Pro Tools. That's where most of the big mixing's been done for a long time, a lot of Atmos mixing. And that runs in tandem with this piece of software called the Renderer that effectively works like a 2-track recorder, apart from that it's, you know, it's a round recorder, that you kind of feed the mix into this thing. I'm not really quite sure 100% of the technicalities, but this is how it was described to me by an active working Atmos engineer. He treats it like an old 2-track recorder, that it kind of gets piled in as you play the mix down. You then top and tail it so it's exactly the same length as the 2-track master, and then it becomes a deliverable. Now with Logic, you got a slightly better setup in terms of flexibility and the fun stuff, because all of the capabilities of the Atmos system really become present with some nice little plugins. And the first one that you're probably going to play with if you start opening Logic up and putting it into Atmos mode is the Object Panner. But this is where you 100% need to be aware of the 2 types of elements that you're mainly going to be using within Atmos. You've got beds, which, let's face it, in terms of film and TV, these are music beds. And the objects will be connected to things that you're seeing on the screen in a TV or a film. So for example, if someone's walking across and they're speaking, the dialogue might slowly follow them or need to follow them. If something's happening on this side of the picture, then that sound needs to be over there. If it's up in the air, it needs to be elevated, etc. All of this is possible within the object panners, whereas the music's probably going to stay on a TV program or film anyway, is probably going to stay on these bed pieces that's kind of, you position within this, in this 3D field, but just leave them there. So say 2 types of objects, beds, they're static, and then these other objects that can move about, and that's where the fun begins. So how do you go about positioning everything inside this kind of environment? Well, the first thing I would say is you are going to need beds, and the best way to think of these is going to be the drums, the bass, and probably some of the lead vocals. If you know that you're not going to really need to move them, then you use those within the bed objects that are in Atmos, and then you position them how you want them, get that kind of spatial feeling, and then you know they're just going to be left. But then you can take certain other elements and start to create all of the fun with movement. Now, there's one thing you have to be fully aware, is that human beings don't like a lot of moving sound. And it's one of the reasons why some of the best Atmos mixes are actually just having things perfectly positioned and pretty much stationary with just a few moving things. If everything's swirling around, which is very tempting once you've got this technology, it can actually make people feel pretty dodgy, because it kind of triggers the balance controls in our ears. Obviously, there's the balance part is very much connected to our hearing channels. So this was always the biggest mistake on some early surround sound mixes, that everything just went frigging crazy. I think it was really the film industry that realised that you kind of need to keep things static. People like that. They love the spaciousness, but they don't want all this zapping movement. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't experiment with this stuff, and I've had great fun moving reverbs backwards and forwards, for example, for different sections of the song, pulling a reverb back a little bit for the chorus, and then you can boost certain elements. But there's one thing that you need to 100% know about spatial audio, is because it is using a binaural process effectively, it uses a form of reverb to create the space. And you can sometimes hear that if you're working with Logic in Atmos mode. If you hit stop, even if you have no effects on any of the channels, you'll sometimes hear this little bit of reverb decay. And that is the kind of fake reverb that's been created to form this 3-dimensional fake view of the actual audio. So do be aware of that. And I believe one of the controls that's called size on the moving objects will actually add or take away reverb to it as you turn it off. But again, these are things that you can investigate with a very, very minimal amount of investment. Of course, if you don't have a Mac, you are probably going to need one to go through all of this. But if you do have a Mac and you have Logic, well, you have the tools already. You just need a half-decent pair of headphones. And the very best way to experience the spatial audio, obviously, is Apple's big wireless headphones. You can Bluetooth them to your Mac and use them as an audio output within Logic, and you're away. You can practice all of this stuff. And the thing is, with any new form of technology like this, is you're going to screw it up left, right, and centre at the beginning. So don't spend any money until you've really got your head around what you are actually capable of within the system the kind of technical restraints within it. And also, you just need lots and lots of practice, like anything, to get better at it. Now, as I said earlier on, if you run a commercial studio or you run a mixing and mastering house and your clients are asking this, this is a slightly different scenario. But you do have to outweigh whether the financial risk of buying stuff when everything's gone up in price at the moment, and we're facing a semiconductor shortage like you've never seen over the coming years. So you need to really work out whether buying a whole load of very expensive equipment and getting fully Dolby certified is going to be something that you can actually see a return on investment on. That is absolutely vital. Please don't do it at this moment in time, just because it's new and shiny. We all love all that kind of stuff, but you do not want to be sat looking around at 7 speakers in years to come going, why the hell did I do that?